And that's kind of the way I'm bridging that gap between her life before, my time in prison, and our time now. Bridging that gap so she can see I'm still her father, still love her, and that it's okay for her to love me back.
Welcome to Can We Have a Conversation? I am your host today, Stuart Perelliot, and we have an exciting new series for you called Returning Citizens. I have a special guest with you today, Wayne Boatwright. Welcome to the show, Wayne.
Thanks, Stuart. It's nice to be with you.
We've had several conversations about your experience being a very professional person in corporate America, advanced studies and Cornell University, and I just want to talk to you just about some of the things that we have shared off the set today on the set, and so just kind of let me know how did you end up being in San Quentin State Prison? What happened?
I can honestly say it was nothing I ever expected. None of my friends, none of my community had ever probably visited a prison, let alone been sentenced and gone to prison. So it was quite a shock for me, I can assure you. But society deemed me guilty, and I agree with society. I was driving while intoxicated. I killed someone. So the crime was actually called gross negligent vehicular manslaughter. So I was sentenced to 7 years, 8 months. And I count myself lucky that after doing my startup, they sent me to San Quentin. If you've got to go to a prison in the California system, San Quentin is the best one to go to.
That's, now, being the fact that you was an attorney, am I correct?
Yeah.
And life was good, right?
I had a wonderful life before prison. Lived in San Francisco, wife, 2 children. A good, solid life. I was a Sunday school teacher at Calvary Presbyterian Church in my community. There's no doubt that I had a loss. Nothing compared to the loss of a life. Don't get me wrong, I took a life. But yeah, I had a real life before I went to prison.
So fast forwarding, so you're living in San Francisco, you're making really good money, family's doing real well, you have this tragedy where you're sentenced. How did that impact your life?
That's a really good question. For me, I equate it to burning down my house. Everything I had was lost. And when I say everything, I mean my marriage, my children, my finances. I was in the hospital myself for almost over 3 months, and then I was in a wheelchair. It took a long convalescence, so I had to spend a lot of money hiring lawyers and paying for the civil settlement for my crime, because I, at the very least, could do that. But by the end of that, by the time I went to prison, I was as broke as anybody else who was to prison.
Yeah. And so when you went to prison, how did that, how was that transition? I had not properly prepared. I didn't know how to prepare for prison. I was on a lot of drugs, pains, meds, and everything else. When you commit a crime like that, you know you need help. So I was seeing a psychiatrist regularly, trying to figure out how to process why am I still alive and not my victim.
What do I do that I've now destroyed my family's life, their expectations for our future? And then to be sentenced to 7 years, 8 months, which is known as the midterm for my crime, was an additional devastation. Not one I took. I mean, I'm a citizen, and if society requires me to serve sentence, I will serve sentence. But don't mistake that for enjoying it. It was a shock to be sentenced to 7 years, 8 months. My children were only 6 and 8 years old at the time. That's as long as they had lived, I would be gone.
So I met you in San Quentin at San Quentin News. And if you could briefly explain what was your task there at San Quentin News Department?
Well, see, now that's interesting. I look at my process of rebuilding this house I destroyed by the fire of my crime as a long process. For me, there's an issue of self-realization and then self-expression. Then something about creativeness. How do you share that self-expression? But ultimately, it becomes an issue of service. And for me, at San Quentin, I served as the managing editor of our newspaper, the San Quentin News. Circulation of 30,000, goes all across California and beyond. The real goal of providing an inmate-run and published and written newspaper for our own community, for the incarcerated. And I served as the managing editor. So I made sure all the stories, we'd pick the stories that would go out, who the reporters would be, they'd come back in and make sure they got properly edited and formatted so we could print the newspaper on a monthly basis.
And now this leads us to our next segment. Being that you are a writer and an editor, I understand you wrote a letter. And the letter was to Neil deGrasse Tyson, and which this guy, I'll just briefly talk about who he is, and then we'll look at the letter. And so it says, Neil deGrasse Tyson is an astrophysicist with the American Museum of Natural History, which I find out that he is a director. Am I correct?
That's right. He's in charge of the whole thing.
He's also the host of the hit radio and Emmy-nominated TV show Star Trek, and the New York Times best-selling author of Astrophysics for People in a Hurry. He lives in New York City. And this is a book of his, and I understand you're in this book.
I am, and believe me, it's as much a shock to me as it would be to anybody else that he's actually published a letter that I had written to him, and then he published his response, and then provided a follow-up about about how I've done since I've gotten out. Yeah, this is a great example of that process for me. I had gone through a lot of work. For me, the main tool was an organization called Vogue, which is the Victim Offender Education Group. It was an 18-month class where we learn about our crimes, what we've done, take responsibility for them, and then how to reach out to victims of crime through a victim panel where we meet with victims and talk with them afterwards. So I've done a lot of work on that. As part of that process, you learn that you have to take responsibility for your actions, but you also have value. As a father, nothing meant more to me than trying to help my kids. And so I took not a risk, but I took a chance. And I said, what could I do that would help my kids? And one of those actions was to write a letter to Neil deGrasse Tyson about how do I keep my kids motivated to study well in school. Because you're scared about that as a parent. I don't get that interaction with them. They'd visit me every once in a while, and I'd talk to them on the phone. But you know, those phone calls, you got a bank of phones, you got 15-minute max, you can't really control when you call them or control the conversation. Our ability to communicate was really limited. But I wanted to inspire my children to continue to study and do well, and that inspired me to write to Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Now we're gonna get ready to look at this letter, but I understand that you have a 13-year-old, just turned 14 today, right?
That's right.
And then you have a 16-year-old son?
That's right. My son's turning 16 next month. He's 15 right
okay.
now.
So now I understand the relationship that you have with both your children because we've talked about it. And your son, being that he goes to a private school.
He does. And for him, when I got out, he came home. Mm-hmm. And I got to tell you, we've been so lucky to keep our relationship close. What's helped a lot with that is sports. Mm-hmm. So it was the basketball season. Mm-hmm. And like any other kid, he decided he was going to be the next basketball star. He wanted to be Stephen Curry, mm-hmm. which is the cutest thing ever. But as soon as I got home, he wanted us to play baseball together like we did when he was a young mm-hmm. child. Mm-hmm. He wanted to show me he could shoot a three-pointer. Mm-hmm. And it was raining in San Francisco. And we're outside till the sun set, playing basketball. He's showing me his different pitches. He's a pitcher on his high school baseball team, as well as a basketball player. Okay. So we got a chance to really bond over that.
Right.
When I first got out, mm-hmm. I've been out almost just a little over a year, exactly 1 year right now that I've been out of prison. So my relationship with him has been able to stay very stable. Mm-hmm. He was a little older when I went to prison.
Right, right.
He was 8.
Yeah.
But he wanted to relive those things we had done before. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't live in the same city I do because he's away at school. So those opportunities are limited in time, but really powerful in experience when we get together.
And so I understand the bond between your daughter and yourself is not quite like your son right now. And that was something that you were trying to repair. You know, being that that you've been separated from her, and you left her at a younger age. And we all know that children respond differently. And so would you say the reason you wrote this letter was to try to get a better bond or get more connected with her? Or?
I was looking for any way mm-hmm. to try to establish a relationship. She had a science project at school that dealt with space. Mm-hmm. And so I heard about it, I had her read it to me, send me a copy of it, we talked about it. So I knew she was fascinated with the idea of space travel and the planets and everything that was going on in the world. And I said, I want to help inspire her to do that as a father. Mm-hmm. And that's hard to do from prison.
Oh, absolutely. And the thing is, I just want to say one brief thing. When you go to prison, a lot of times you hear people say that there's no rehabilitation in prison. There's nothing good that can happen in prison. And would you say that from your experience being in prison that there was something good that happened?
Good. I am who I am because of prison.
Tell me more about that.
And I will never demean that by wishing it hadn't happened. It happened. Mm-hmm. I committed a crime. There was a state requirement for me to serve sentence, and I was going to do that. I didn't know what to expect in prison. Mm-hmm. But I'm the most grateful, not for the work I did at a job or other things, but that I actually had the chance to participate in a lot of extra group activity that was of my own volition, right? These are voluntary mm-hmm. things. Yeah, you can get stuff done in prison, but you got to have the desire to do it. You got to go find it mm-hmm. and do it. And I took advantage of that opportunity. I went to AA regularly because I had been drinking and driving. Mm-hmm. I'm about almost 8 years sober now, and I'm proud of my sobriety.
Yes.
It means something to me. I work at that every day, mm-hmm. even now, by going to regular meetings. But I learned to do that in prison. Mm-hmm. So I'm so grateful for that. I'd never been to an AA meeting before prison, let's put it that way.
Well, the reason I asked that is because, being an attorney and going to a prestigious school, Ivy League school, is a great opportunity to get a successful life. But then when you get into prison, you take a different route, and now you're writing. And so this writing helps you to write this letter to Neil deGrasse. Let's take a look at the letter that you wrote.
Dear Neil deGrasse Tyson, as a father of 2 bright teens, I write seeking your advice on how to encourage their STEM studies. I have very limited opportunities to communicate with my precious children. I want to encourage my children to study science and math. Given their keen interest in astronomy, one seeks to become the first astronaut veterinarian. I hope you could direct me to resources, websites, or organizations my children may use to grow and learn, given their potential. The consequences of my crime are manifold and impact my children in more ways than I can fully appreciate from San Quentin. Still, I hope to stay involved in their continued development. Any recommendations you could make would be greatly appreciated. Might my kids visit you in New York? A chance to see a famous scientist, arranged by their father, would be evidence of my continued love for my children, and a special adventure as well. Regards, Wayne Boatwright, San Quentin State Prison.
You know, what are the chances of you writing a person who is as famous as Neil deGrasse, and he responds back? Not only does he respond back, but he actually reads your letter before a huge audience. I mean, that ought to be, what was that experience like?
It's one of the rare gifts that I've been able to share. Their mom is an angel. She has taken care of those kids as a single parent while I was in prison. We decided to get divorced a couple months after I started my sentence. I wanted her to have her own life. So she's had to deal with this all on her own. But that means she's been the center of their lives. Mm-hmm. She's done everything for them. Mm-hmm. This was something that both I and her mom could point to and say to Cassatt, this is your dad's doing, mm-hmm. completely. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The letter, the reply, the book, the show, mm-hmm. the being invited backstage and a chance to appear on stage. That was very important for me to try to establish a relationship with my daughter.
Reestablish.
Exactly,
yes.
Reestablish a relationship with my daughter, because she really had a hard time with that. And I've got to tell you, this was a key for that. She now allows me to volunteer at her school, mm-hmm. Because I can be seen by her friends and be there. Mm-hmm. I had her over for her birthday dinner the day before her birthday at my little apartment, her and her mom. And do you know, to share other memories like that with her, mm-hmm. I went down to the local library and checked out a Dr. Seuss book called Oh, the Places You'll Go. Mm-hmm. And so I read that to her mm-hmm. again, mm-hmm. something I haven't been able to read to her in over 7 years mm-hmm. for her birthday. Mm-hmm. And she remembered that I had read that stuff to her when she was a young child. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the way I'm bridging that gap mm-hmm. between her life before, my time in prison, and our time now. Bridging that gap so she can see I'm still her father, mm-hmm. still love her, and that it's okay for her to love me back. Mm-hmm. Those remembrances and reminders are so important, whether it's a new experience like this or reading Dr. Seuss. It's a testament of my love to them more than an expectation that somebody as famous as Neil is going to write back. And we still correspond, mm-hmm. by the way. He did write back to this letter, but I wrote it in 2016 because I was desperate. Mm-hmm. Desperate to stay close to my kids, but I was evolved enough to realize that I had to stop being proud and silent and ask for some help. Mm-hmm. So I decided I'd ask him for some help. Why not?
Right, right. What a beautiful story. And it, you know, I have to commend you on even taking the courage to step out and on faith and just try it, you know, because, you know, as I know and you know, many other, the viewers may not know, you know, it's very lonely behind those bars. And there's all kind of things that are not positive there. And so sometimes you have to encourage yourself in trying to see there is another way, or I'm not going to be here for the rest of my life. How do I still be engaged with my children? How do I let my children know that I love them? How can I put them in a place? Because, you know, as we talked about earlier, you allow your daughter to have an experience with this man. And if it wasn't for you, she would have never met him.
I never expected that. I'll be honest. I asked for it, but you know, it's tough in the world to get people's attention. And so I worked hard at this letter. I didn't whip it off in 10 minutes. I mean, I wrote it and I rewrote it because I wanted to be sincere in my expression of my desire to help my children.
So looking back at that time, that opportunity that he responded to you, how was that for you? What was that experience?
It is a true lifeline. I got to tell you, you're in prison, you're in the midst of it, and it's a mess. And to have him be responsive and write back to me was a gracious act by a good man. But even more than that, as he said there near the end, this idea of me being involved with my interaction with him. You see, the biggest challenge I found for my children, especially my daughter, but also for many adults, is that they don't know how to deal with returning citizens. They got no concept of how to interact, so they tend to be hesitant. And so anything that I could do to have a famous adult acknowledge me as a human being, as a returning citizen, be respectful to me, interact with me, that has power on my kids. Now my kids can see, oh, it's okay to love my dad again, even though he's out of prison, even though he's a convicted criminal. It's okay to love my dad. These adults love my dad. Even famous people write him a letter. That's the gift, was that he reached out to me and treated me like a human being and replied to me in a letter. Now, the big killer about this story is he's a man of his word. He invited me and my daughter. My son was away in school, so I brought my ex-wife to meet him before his lecture and to participate in the lecture itself. And in fact, as we were talking with him, he treated my daughter perfectly. He'd put the catered food in front of her, ask her questions, and he goes, do you think I could introduce you as part of the lecture? This was at Davies Symphony Hall in San Francisco, 1,500 people. This is a big event. He goes, would you mind? And she goes like, okay, sure. And then as they were talking, he goes, well, maybe I could bring you up on stage and ask you a few questions like we're talking about right now. And she said yes. And to my shock and to my eternal gratefulness, this man gave my daughter a memory she'll have for the rest of her life.
Well, we're going to have to close on this one. It is a pleasure meeting with you, but we're gonna come back and we're going to show that clip of your daughter being engaged with Neil deGrasse. But for now, I just want to thank you for you sharing and being so open about this. As my relationship with you and me as a part of Man to Man and trying to mentor you as far as kind of help you get more engaged with your children and to talk you through this process. And the things that I always tell you is to make sure that you continue to stay present, continue to be consistent.
And be consistent.
And you're doing that, and you will see a fruit of your labor. I am so excited to be your friend. I'm so excited about how your life is transforming right before your eyes. It's nothing of your testament. It's only the testament of God of what He's doing and how you have to be patient, which is a very difficult thing, I know. but you know, as you allow God to do what He's doing in your life, you're going to start seeing Him manifest His goodness and His mercy and His grace in ways that as the Bible talks, or Joseph says in the Bible, it says, what the enemy meant for evil, God turned it into good. And I believe there's going to be some good out of His story about this transition in your life where it looked like you hit rock bottom, but you're going to come back and rise to the top. Thank you again.
Thanks,
appreciate you. With Wayne Boatwright, Returning Citizens. This is only one of many series. We're going to show the conversation with him, well, with his daughter and Neil deGrasse. And then we're going to talk about his transition from San Quentin back to society and how difficult that transition was for him and some of the struggles that he had to experience. We'll see you soon.